Okay, we're recording, and today we've got a special guest to the workaround. I'm here with Ryan Watson, my longtime friend and business partner across multiple companies. Bonus fun fact: we are recording this a couple weeks before our birthdays. I'm on December 15th. He's on December 16th. I don't know. It's weird. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
One out of 365 minus two. I don't know. Divided by two something
What are the
chance. But
what are the chances we can do it?
it's just that time of year. We're both kids who were
Yeah.
unfortunate to have birthdays right around Christmas, so we get the
Yep.
short shrift. but
Indeed. Yep. Indeed.
we are kicking off a new concept, which basically less interview, more dialogue. So something that I think would be fun if
Yep.
this works. We'll do some more of it with
Do more.
two of
Doesn't
us
work.
and
We
other
can do some other
people
more.
and see what happens. But today's topic is five things Ryan and I each are going to share. We've got up to, depending on time, five
Yeah.
things
Yeah.
that most surprised us about going through the M&A process. And we thought this would be good because we've got a lot of founders in the audience, a lot of startup folks, many more who work at companies that either have or may be acquired in the future. And we've been on multiple sides of this, both individually and together. And I'll just share a couple of things of where I'm coming from, and then Ryan is going to kind of do the same, and then we'll kick it off.
Yeah.
But my background is first went through the M&A process at a digital agency called Bridge Worldwide that I was partners of with some other friends. That's a company that we sold in fall 2004. We had a 5-year earnout. Went well. It was about a $50 million all-in acquisition price. We had multiple companies that were competing for us in that. We were kind of like one of the first wave of digital agency acquisitions. And then the next company was I founded called Ahology. Ryan came into the company about halfway through as we were almost dead. He was desperate, I guess, and we were on
Something like that.
our last legs. But I'd say Ryan is like the second, kind of next generation co-founder with me, and we were arm in arm on our pivot, getting profitable at Ahology, and then sale to Quotient, which happened in the fall of 2018. We had about a year and a half earnout, got our checks a couple weeks before COVID hit, and got ourselves fired out of that. And
Sure
then
did. It's a
I
tough
also was on
tough
the
day.
board of a company called Amify, which is an Amazon marketing service company that was acquired last year by a company called Cart. And I think everything around that is undisclosed at this time, so I won't go too far into that one. But that's my M&A background. Ryan, introduce yourself a
Yeah.
little bit more and your story.
By the way, I have to say, I don't know if you noticed in my background, Bob, but I have two additional little things there. Did you see
Tombstones.
those? Yeah, I'll bring those out here in a second. But yeah, those are our deal tombstones. So yeah, my I guess my credibility in the M&A space starts, of course, with our sort of shared experience at Ahology, and we'll obviously talk about that a lot today. In addition to the role I played there and some of the things you and I separately do, Bob, I also am a partner at a accounting firm for creative agencies called Upsourced, where, among other things, I lead an M&A practice, right? So we have about 120 marketing agencies that we service on an ongoing basis as their outsourced CFO. And occasionally one of them will raise their hand and say, you know what, I'd like to take this thing to market and see if we can generate an offer from a qualified buyer. Or, you know what, I'm looking to grow inorganically. I've got a target identified and I want to roll somebody up. And in both of those cases, my team will help jump in, help negotiate the deal, help do the diligence, or facilitate the diligence, depending on which direction it's going. So after our time at Ahology, I've seen this. I think in most cases smaller than the one that you and I went through, but I've seen this another dozen times or so. So I've got that perspective to lend to this thing as well.
Cool. Well, why
Should we
don't
get
you
into
do
it?
the honors? Kick us
Yeah, I'll
off.
do it.
What's
Okay.
something you've
Five.
learned on your list of
One of
biggest
my five
surprises in the M&A
surprises.
process? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm gonna go to the top of my list. My my number one surprise was that valuation as an idea, valuations are Wild West, right? Like I
Hmm.
went in assuming that like, everybody kind of pays in a sort of like tight band for like, here's a business that does this amount of profit. You get 10 offers. They're all going to be kind of within the similar band of one another. There's like a quantitative scientific approach. And in a reality, like that is just not at all my lived experience, even though valuations are often inspired by a, air quotes, rigorous mathematical kind of evaluation. They end up being far more emotional than they are, purely defined, right? So that's
All
my, and
right.
I can
We
elaborate.
need an example
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
want to know about
So
this
look,
emotion.
well, look, I mean, I can say it's funny. It's totally all the map, right? So, I mean, we can talk. We can talk. These are friends. We're among friends, right, Bob? We can talk freely
Yeah.
about our
I
own
mean, it's
deal.
just us. I think we've got one listener. So
Yeah,
don't
exactly. Well, look, we'll
let-
send an NDA along
he's on
separately
my
for that
side.
individual. Yeah, exactly. So like take our deal specifically, right? Like, I often think back. I
So
often think
what?
back
So
about
our deal, which was what?
which was Ahology, right?
Okay.
So the business that you and I sold, I think
Influencer
you,
marketing, kind of
yep,
tech-enabled service, sold as
agency
media.
like, yep,
Yeah,
sold as
agency
media,
like, sold
right?
as like a media buy.
So we had some technology, but to be quite frank, this was more of the deal looked more like buying a service business, more like buying an agency, right? Than it did. I mean, to be honest with you, I think the buyer was even surprised to learn that we had technology after the fact, right? So that was not the sort of
We'll come
core
back to that.
reason. Yeah, that was not the core reason for the purchase. And so, again, so our deal, we ultimately, a couple things I thought were very surprising in that process. Number one was um, we ultimately sold the business for $50 million when you include both the guaranteed amount, which I think was 20,
20
with
up
an
front.
earnout amount, which was 20, and the opportunity to outperform the earnout and get to 30 in earnout for a combined total consideration of $50 million. At the time, that business was doing sub 10 million in revenue and meaningfully sub 2 million in profit. I don't even totally remember exactly how much we were doing in profit. Maybe seven figures, maybe not seven figures, right? But if you've been in the, like, if you run an agency and you've been in the M&A game and you've looked at, deal multiples on businesses, you won't find any in the neighborhood of 20 to 50, right? Like that doesn't make any sense at all. Yet that ultimately was the price that we sold this for. And again, I can't even really ascribe exactly why that's ultimately the price that Quotient paid, other than the fact that A, they wanted our business, right? Like we offered something that they were interested in. I mean, let me back up. A, they wanted to buy a business. Like they had a team whose job it was to buy a business. They decided they wanted to buy one. We were in the area that they were looking to buy. They wanted to buy our business, and $50 million was roughly what they paid for businesses. And it's just like that simple, right? Like, we obviously try to get the math to meet to match. But ultimately, the evaluation of that deal was far more influenced by just a bunch of subjective factors. I'll just tell you, like sitting in my seat on my side, I see that same thing play out often to the reverse, right? Like often, I
Hmm.
had a business who did, I mean, gosh, not that much less profit than what Ahology did and sold for $50 million, sold for $0 up front, exclusively an earnout with a target compensation of like $2 million. And that was just a function of like who the buyer was in that situation and ultimately how motivated they were, and ultimately they got approached and it wasn't a burning need for them. They said, sure, if the deal was right or the terms were right, I'll tack this thing on. Compare that situation to ours. You just realize that again, it's influenced so much more by who the individuals are and why they're motivated to make a choice than it is like a pure quantitative calculation. So anyways, let me stop rambling. Bob,
That's good.
surely you
No,
were here. Like what was your take on that?
well, I'm gonna merge your number one here with my number one
Okay.
because
Okay, so what
there's
is
enough
your number one?
overlap here,
What is your number one?
and certainly there's a few things. And mine was like under the idea of even a strategic acquisition is not necessarily very strategic.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's
Say
what
more.
that's what we're looking for is typically a strategic acquisition meaning, for those who are new to the process, it's not just for cash flow, it's for adding something that you hope it's 1 + 1 = 4 or 5, 10, whatever. So,
Yep.
a new capability, or to, get something so a competitor can't have it. There's a lot of different things that you'd say strategic.
Yeah.
But I'd say in our deal, like an example, the price paid. What was that? I think you have a great point, which is they have an M&A team, and they did an acquisition about once a year.
And it was
Just what they
time.
did. Like,
This
it's a public
person,
company.
like, there was a person whose job it was to do this, and what is that person going to talk about in
And
their
he did
annual
his job
review?
well.
Yeah.
But
True.
I
True.
got to I got to sit on a couple of meetings with the CEO, who was released from his job about a year after we came in. But
Unrelated.
that's all public record here.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I remember sitting in on a meeting about, oh, what do we buy next? And the CEO was like looking at the websites of companies and said, "Oh, they have a good website." I mean, that was the
Yeah.
conversation.
That's it. Yeah.
But and I had a kind of intense meeting with that CEO about a year in, a few weeks after he was no longer at the company, where we were doing some work that we believed we should get credit for in our earnout.
Yeah.
And he wasn't on the same page. And so I had to fly out to company headquarters and have this conversation with him. I said, well, remember in our deal, we said anything that we work on using our technology, we get credit. And he goes, you have technology? So what you're alluding to, that's the
Yeah.
story. And I'm just like, what the hell? This guy doesn't understand. We're going to come back to that too. But like, here's another one from Hology. When we were going through this, we had an investment bank, which did a great job for us. And one of the things they were able to do was to quickly rustle up some other interest to try to get some competitive bids.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the companies we went to was a company we already had some relationship with. I'll hold their name off, but we had probably for a year and a half, our salespeople had been working with their salespeople and pitching clients together. They did something that we didn't, so it was
Yeah.
complementary services with the same type of clients, and the clients loved it. And this is kind of an old school company with an old school product, so they were able to bring us in, have something fresh. And I thought for sure that this company made some acquisitions. They were owned by a multi-billion-dollar private equity family office. They certainly needed something fresh in their business. And our investment banks went out. We had a couple of meetings with, I think, if you remember, like 5 senior
Mm-hmm.
people in corp dev. These people,
Oh,
like,
I remember that. Yep.
huge salaries of stuff they're supposed to know what they're doing. And I think they just came back and like they didn't even bother doing a bid, and they said something like, "Oh, we prefer when you're up to 20 million. That's when we get
Totally.
interested." And you go, guys, like, go talk to your own people. This is
Yeah.
working. Like, this is a no brainer.
Well, I have to say, if so, I like violently agree with everything you say. And by the way, I have to use this as a segue to go to my second one,
All right.
which is nobody knows what they're doing. That's my big surprise. And I say that lovingly, to be honest with you. And again, like some folks accepted, like the law firms that we worked with obviously do this many dozens of times, and they know what they're doing. And I think our bankers more or less knew what they were doing. But just in general, I the great surprise for me was just again going through this process. You just have this assumption that like I'm selling my business to a company, a large publicly traded company. They make acquisitions. They have a team whose job it is to make acquisitions. They must be experts here. They must really know what they're doing. And I can tell you that for me, that belief that these people are like on their shit and really know what they're doing created a lot of anxiety for me because in our deal at Ohology, my job was to own the diligence process, right? Like my job was to make sure that like after we signed the LOI that we got through due diligence like quickly and without hiccup, and we ultimately got to sign. And like that job, by the way, is like being a long snapper. Nobody celebrates you doing a wonderful job, but like the deal could absolutely fall apart and it's your fault. So I had a lot of anxiety. And so every time that so they obviously send this like very large request list of all the things that they're looking for. And I agonized over every single thing. Like I'd open it up and just think like, okay, what's the angle here? What could they possibly be looking for? What is a way they might interpret this in a direction I don't want them to? How do I like head that off or provide some additional context or whatever? And I did that for like almost every thing, every document, every contract that we sent over. There was one specifically I lost sleep over for like a week. And by the way, I think in retrospect, like it was good that I did that. Like we got through it quicker maybe
Oh
than
yeah.
we otherwise
By
would
the way,
have.
I
But
didn't lose sleep because you were
good for you.
losing sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I lost enough sleep for fucking both of us. Anyway, yeah, so I get on the other side of this and I realize like, oh my God, like if I had just had this context, like again, nothing against these individuals, but it's not like it's not like they do these deals all the time. I can guarantee you, they didn't even look at like all the things that we provided. I'm not even sure they looked at most of the things we provided. And if they did, I guarantee they didn't know what they were looking for. Like they didn't have a specific agenda. This was just hey, I'm like head of finance. I'm in corporate law. I'm whatever person on sales ops. Like I got a call or I got an email on a Monday. So I'm going to show up to this meeting I thought about 0 seconds before I got here. And I'm just going to make sure that this thing doesn't blow up and it's egg on my face. But again, I'm
Mm.
not. So anyway, like just realizing that everybody's just making it up as they go. None of these, again, your story about the CEO who I won't name, but you can look up and figure out who it is, pulling up websites as they're thinking about buying companies. Dude, that's it. Like that's everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody is just kind of figuring it out. And so you realize, I guess, a couple of things that, I mean, if you made that productive, like what would you take from that? Number one is just that, you certainly you can breathe a little easier in that, like it's just these are just people that are just trying to figure it out as they go, like you. And number two, like just a little bit of preparation, a little bit of shit together goes a long way, right? Like it's if an M&A is a battle, right, between one deal party and the other deal party, it doesn't take a lot to come to that battle over prepared.
Hmm.
And I think, I think we had a pretty positive outcome because of that. But anyway, all that to say,
Yeah.
nobody has their shit together. It's
And
wild.
that's just a life thing, by the
It's
way.
a
But
life thing.
especially in
It's
business,
not just M&A.
we could go, I think we'll have another one around like things you learned in the earn out or after the deal's done. But um, yeah, like don't I think prepare for hardcore strategy, like plan that you're going against Soros or something, Buffett, but
Yeah.
don't expect that's it.
Don't be
Like,
surprised when you're not.
yeah,
just,
it's probably not.
just some guy.
All right, I'm going to keep the theme on my second one around no one knows what they're doing. Is investors don't help very much either,
Yeah, totally.
and you know, as human beings, as people, they're very good. Our investors all very good. But another thing that I think as a founder, you come in, like these people are working with so many startups and they've had acquisitions, they've had, who knows how many offers. Like when you get that approach, you assume they know too, and that they're going to be helping guide the process. But they don't.
They don't.
That does not happen. And I think there's a couple reasons. I think the first, I don't know if these are good defenses here, but the first is they really don't understand the market or your business.
Totally.
Sorry, like, and that's just like you can't. And by the way, I'm also saying this. I spent a year between these companies I sold as a VC, and I barely remembered what companies in our own portfolio did. From
Yeah.
one meeting or the other, and that's just the way it is. You meet so many, unless you're like have an extremely tight thesis of we only do healthcare companies with social media and whatever. Like you have to be a jack of all trades, a little bit about everything. Which again, unfortunately, when you have to go really specific, like, oh, we got to negotiate this deal, and what's the right multiple for ad tech / services / media product,
Yeah.
they don't know, and so that's like a big part of it. Like they've not seen, and then I mean, look at it. We had Series A investors. That's early stage.
Yeah.
most companies get acquired later if they're successful. Successful acquisitions usually happen later stage, and that's kind of what
Right.
the Series A wants. Like they don't
Yeah.
want an exit, right off,
Yeah. Yeah.
2 years into raising the money. They expect that the big guys and IPOs happen way down the line, and they're still working on what are the early stages. So it's just not something that they have the muscle memory for,
Right.
and then they fear screwing things up. That this is a big deal. There's money at stake. Finally getting these LPs some cash back after asking for, wires inbound again and again and again. Oh, finally we got one. They don't want to screw it up. So, I think the other thing that's interesting, and this can kind of work to your advantage, or something to watch out for too, is when you do want, this is where, like, for the founders, like for you and I, we wanted certain things and
Yep.
we just did it. Like, we just said, this is what we're going to do. And we
Hmm.
had, I think, a lot of power for that. I think we used it, for the right reasons. But I remember a couple examples of that where you have to drive the decision
Yeah.
for what's best for you as the leaders of the whole company, and making sure employees, investors, everyone, is happy. One was picking investment bankers. So I think what a lot of founders tend to do is say, oh, we got an offer, maybe we should get an investment bank. And one of the VCs said, oh, you should work with so and so. There's various problems with that. I think one of them is, now you've got the investment bank works now for that investor.
Hmm.
That's how so they're going to think of, how do they get more customers, whining and
Right.
dining those investors. That's the repeat game that they're in. That's the relationship they want. And so they're going to have a bias to look out for what's best for them. In our case, we built relationships directly with the investment bankers over a long period of time. Basically, we're interviewing them over a course of 2 years, checking in, getting their advice. And then we said, we want to go with Needham in our case. The VCs are like, oh, why them? It's like, well, I've been talking to them forever and they're great. And they also did the deal with the same buyer last year,
The
so
most recent deal. Yeah.
okay, like, and there was no way, there's like, oh, we have these one guys, but like, you go with your person, your team that you vetted,
Yep.
and they work for you and everybody else. The second one was, I'm going to say the second one for my other ideas. But
Are you going to number three? Is this
yeah, I
your
was
number
going to
three
go to my
surprise?
number three. Should I
Go to
just
your
go
number
on to
three
number three? My
surprise.
number three is kind of related, but you get to just ask for what you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, I guess it's a negotiation thing. I will say, I read the book, Never Split the Difference, which a lot of people have. I wouldn't bother
Yep.
reading it until you're really close to doing a deal, because it'll just go away. Like, and there's blog posts out there. Maybe this podcast you'll save, for your,
Yeah.
wait until we get a, inbound interest and listen to all that stuff at once. But, one of the key points that you just learn is, I think it was great for us because we did not have to sell. And that's
Hmm.
always the number one position you want to be in. We were profitable, we were growing, everybody's happy, we weren't burned out. But I'll speak for myself there. We weren't burned out, right, Ryan?
No, no, not at all. I
But
mean,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
it was like the peak.
it
And
was.
again, there's always other things, like you sell when you're at a peak and blah, blah, blah. But I think something I heard that got me thinking in this: make sure you ask for what you want, aside from the confidence of not having to sell, which is huge. There was a story of a friend of mine who was a CFO working for another startup. And that company, he was telling the story of that CEO negotiated, as part of the sale, like a multi-million-dollar personal employment contract. And we were like, yeah, I don't know if that's good fiduciary responsibility. Like, that goes into the deal. Like, that CEO
Right.
just got an extra piece of the deal, for
Yeah.
himself. I took that as, oh, okay, like, the CEO has a lot of power. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that, again, related to everyone else doesn't know what they're doing. You know what you're doing. It's your business. It's your baby. You drive the decisions. And
Yeah.
I think it worked. A couple examples over that worked. For us, what was key is getting some real incentives for all of our employees. And that was a combination of, we had a long earn out with $30 million or zero. It could have been zero, could have been $30 million, somewhere in between. So we wanted to make sure people were incentivized to pull together to hit that. And secondly, because, we had a lot of ups and downs. We had a down round. A lot of the employees weren't going to see much out of the deal, and long term, high valuable employees. So I was able to ask our acquirer, what can we do in your structure that really helps everybody and gives a big incentive? And they came back with exactly what we wanted, which was of the 30 million potential second. They basically said you can let's create a 10% of the proceeds as a carve out, and you guys can split it however you want. And so we're like, that's great. And we went back to our investors, and a couple like, oh, I've never seen that before. Oh, that's unusual. And we're like,
Yeah.
sorry, that's what we're doing, and it makes
Yeah.
perfect strategic sense. And it's also the right thing to do, but you can take it just as a financial incentive for everybody to work hard. And those same investors, one of the same investors that raised the questions, like, I've never seen, wow, this was great. I've never seen an earnout work before.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, because no one's smart enough to do that. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you're not thinking about it. So that's something we're picking this investment maker. We're doing this deal. Another thing, Ryan, I think we talked about, um, you did such a great job on the due diligence that we finished it early. And then
Yeah,
we
we did.
said, like, hey,
Yeah.
can we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
have a free month? Like, can we have an extra month to hit our max earnout?
Oh,
So it was really an
I
18 months
forgot
to hit
about that.
X amount of revenue. We're like, oh, we've
We
got
got
this
a
thing going. We're going
19.
to close a month early. And we were like, you asked the question, hey, what if we could we just go ahead and start the clock early too on getting that? We didn't need it, but
Yeah. Yeah. At the
ask,
time, we
why
didn't know we
not?
didn't need it. Yeah.
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 But some things we asked for we didn't get. I asked for no cap. We didn't get no cap. Um, that's the
But it
second
was
time. At
high,
least this time we
150%.
asked. What's
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. 150%. That's still pretty high. That's not bad.
It was high, but would have been even higher if there was no cap. But you
Well, some
can't
of
have
those
everything.
disagreements would have been more violently fought, I think,
True.
if there was no
Yeah.
cap. So
Yeah.
maybe it worked to our advantage to some degree. I will say that like that learning is it's not on my list, but it's a really good one because again, I think it's buyers have been through this or have the opportunity to go through this multiple times, but sellers generally speaking only go through it one time. Like it's it's rare to create something of value that you can sell more than once in your life. So as a seller, you have no idea that you can dictate terms to some degree, and then you have flexibility to ask for things like, again, the carve out is the one that stuck in my mind. And I've actually, it's crazy how few people consider doing something like that. But ever since we did the carve out, every time I have a seller who's considering one of these, I recommend it. I mean, again, like you said, it's definitely the right thing to do for your employees. But honestly, forget about that for a second. Like these earnouts are incredibly difficult to achieve because the business fundamentally changes on the other side. You can decide, I mean, you can imagine all you want about what life is going to be like on the other side of the purchase, but you won't fully understand until you go through it. And the only way to keep this organization locked in is for everybody's incentives to be like laser focused in the right place. And I genuinely don't think we would have had the outcome we did if we didn't have that carve out. I genuinely don't think so.
And just for people listening who haven't, I don't know, I've written about the story a year ago or something, but everybody ended up getting something like a whole year's salary extra. We had kind of
Yeah.
different structures, and this is something where if you're listening to this and you're thinking about how do you structure this, send me a note. We'll set up some time. I'll take you all through it. We did something similar at our agency, which is kind of how we got the idea came from. On my
Yeah.
side originally, is we had a 5-year earnout at our agency, and we similarly was like, we got to lock these people in. We got a long, and 90% of our value, we got like 10% up front, 90% with a few small top outs. So maybe call it 80% of the total possible value, which ended
Came
up
from
being
the
$50
earnout.
million, was based on end of 5-year revenue and profit. And so we're like, all right, we can't do
Yeah.
this ourselves. We're gonna have to grow a lot. In our case back then, we had a small group, handful of very senior leaders that we included kind of in a shadow equity kind of deal. And then a friend of mine who was part of that, he went to another digital agency. They got acquired by the same buyer. and kind of expanded it. They took that idea too and expanded it to in maybe another 25 people. And so I was excited that we were going to be able to include everybody who was an employee by a certain amount of time too. Like, so again, getting too far in the weeds on the structure, but it was great. I mean, it's such a feel good thing too, where, everybody's in it together. You've got this goal.
Yeah. 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 People had down payments on homes. I mean, yeah, it was cool. All
What's your
right.
next?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go a little wonky, like a little detailed, but we'll see if I can land the plane here because it was a genuine surprise, and I think it's also pretty meaningful. Which is, um, my learning was that the cash that you receive at close can vary by as much as seven figures, depending on a couple key terms that are in the body of every agreement, and namely that is networking capital. So networking capital is this concept that is contemplated by every sale, and I'll explain what that is. So basically, when you buy a business, the presumption is that you buy the business on a cash-free, debt-free basis, right? So I'm going to buy Ahology, and all of the cash sitting in the business sticks with the original owners, as does the debt, right? So I'm just getting the business free of the cash and the debt. But the getting the business assumes that it comes with some amount of like, quote, adequate capitalization, like
Hmm.
enough working capital in the business for it to operate, right? And so a lot of buyers and sellers will move quickly through this idea, right? Which is to say, okay, so the way it works is you negotiate kind of what is that minimum amount of net working capital that should be in that business, right?
Hmm.
So when I take over, right, as the buyer, when that business conveys to me, it comes to me with that minimum amount of net working capital, which is sufficient to continue to run the business, basically. And so a lot of times, what buyers and sellers will do is they'll just look at like historic net working capital, right? They'll just
Hmm.
look at, let's say, the trailing 3 months or the trailing 6 months, and let's just say the trailing 3 months is, just make easy numbers, $1 million. And so if we say in the deal, okay, the net working capital minimum is $1 million, so we get to the date of close, and if the business has $1.2 million of net working capital on hand, then that excess, that $200,000, just gets swept off the top and it goes to the sellers, to the owners, right? If that number is less than $1 million, let's say we get to the date of close and there's only $750,000 of net working capital in the business, that $250,000 shortfall comes out of the owner's pocket, right? Or it may come out of their cash or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so these differences can be quite large. Now, again, most people just kind of go through, they just kind of pass through this assumption pretty quickly, and they just say, oh, we'll just use like the last 3 months or last 6 months. And I'll say that in some situations, that's the right, excuse my dog there. In some situations, that's the right assumption. In others, it's not. So I've had
Hmm.
two instances where I've renegotiated or negotiated the networking capital for the benefit of the party I was representing. So in the case of
Hmm.
Ahology, we had a situation where we had been profitable for 18 months, right? We were
Yep.
owned by a venture backed or partially owned by, VC funds. And so for that reason, like we didn't distribute capital a lot, right? Like we left a lot of the working capital into the business. So as we got closer and closer to the sale, we had this like war chest that we were sitting on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we had done the conventional thing and just said, oh, well, we'll just sort of like peg it to like the last 3 months, that would have assumed that like this business goes to you really well capitalized, like a ton of receivables and working capital for you to run the business, more than, it was my opinion, was required to run the business.
Gotcha.
So we developed our own expectation. We said, hey, look, we're not going to do the traditional thing that everybody does. We think the net working capital minimum for this business should instead be this other number, instead on this other convention, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think in our case, it was like 3 months of fixed monthly operating expenses, whatever. The point of this is
Mhm.
that the convention didn't really matter. We did the same. I did the same thing for a buyer who had a business that I felt like was undercapitalized relative to the history, and we increased the net working capital target.
Hmm.
The point is, in both of those cases, like in the case of Ahology, we ended up taking, I want to say, like $1.5 million extra off the top. So our guaranteed amount was $20 million plus the net working capital surplus that we negotiated,
Oh.
which was another 1.5 million. So it ended up that our purchase price at close was 21.5 million because of that specific term. And so this is just like a little lesson that I've taken with me to other areas, and always sort of like try to think outside the box around
Hmm.
how can we reposition net working capital, because again, it can mean 5 as much as 10% of the total deal price in your favor or not in your favor if you're not careful and thoughtful about that.
Well, that's
And I didn't know
good.
that
I
going in.
mean,
Yeah,
it is wonky.
wonky.
But that's really, I mean, that's meaningful.
Yeah,
My question, and again, I'd say going back, like this is one of the things where, I think I took a couple accounting classes in college, undergrad,
yeah, yeah,
Ryan's on it. Ryan's saying this. He's working with the lawyers and the iBankers. Like, all right, you got it. Cool. Like, I think I just learned more about the deal than you told me back then, which is fine.
good,
It
good.
was a
That's how
great
we
partnership.
that's how we drew it up. Yeah,
But for the audience at home,
yeah.
how do you like? Is this really another one of those things that people don't know? Like the head of finance for X company, are they going to always think of this or see this? Is this one of those other things that like it's not done very often, so people miss it?
No, I mean, it just depends. I mean, buy sellers who only do this once in their life are gonna miss it, right? So, like,
Okay.
if you're listening to this and you're thinking about selling your business, especially if you don't have a banker, you will miss this. 100% of the clients that I work with at our accounting firm who have gone through a sale have not considered this as a lever for their deal. It isn't like this thing that I invented. Like, it is for more sophisticated buyers and sellers, it is a sometimes hotly negotiated or
Mm,
contested item, right?
hmm.
So bankers are going to be aware of it, sophisticated buyers are going to be aware of it. And so then it really gets down to, again, in our case, the CFO of the business that was buying us was aware, of course, of this as a concept and this as a
Okay.
negotiating
Yeah.
point.
Got it.
And so then it really just became, okay, again, in our specific case, our position, I wasn't just a, a ploy. It was genuine, right?
Yeah.
We genuinely had what would be excess working capital relative to like our peers. And I think we were on like, solid ground to say, look, that should not convey. That wasn't contemplated by your offer.
Hmm.
And that, again, so that may work for you if you're selling, or it may not. It may not be relevant to you because you're thinly capitalized. But of all the things that, like, most of the sort of financially impactful terms are gonna be stipulated in the LOI. So once you get on the other side of the letter of intent, how much money you're going to make is pretty much set in stone, with this singular exception. This is
Mm.
basically the only final lever that can either swing meaningfully in your favor or out of your favor. And you should just be really thoughtful about that term.
That's great. And also, I think one of those tests of is this going to be a good partnership or not?
Totally.
It's kind of like you hate in negotiation to use the F word, fairness,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it is kind of like, hey, and there's a few things we had. I wrote recently about we had a competitor sue us right in the middle of negotiating for this thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, my brain's going, they might use us against us or, something like
Blow up the
that.
whole
Or, and
deal.
you hear the story of, I mean, and by the way, we could, I don't know if we're going to hit on this in this conversation, but I also wrote about kind of a scummy, borderline scummy company that wanted to merge us with another business that we had
Oh.
some talks with.
Oh, I remember
Lots of
that.
inside scoop there, but I wrote
Yeah.
about that one too. If you
Yep.
can't find it, let me know. I'll send it to you. But you kind of assume the worst, but then when the best happen, like, oh, okay, we got it. We've never done this before, but that's good. Like, like, okay, this is, I could work here. I'm going to trust other things too. And that's really important.
Yep.
All right. Let me jump back. My number four, moving right
Okay.
along here, which is shocked in both of my acquisition experiences that there was zero plan for what happens after the earnout is done.
Mm.
Unbelievable. Like, so my agency was purchased by WPP at the time, the world's largest advertising holding company. They have a massive team that just does
What they do.
acquisitions around the world, puts these things together, 5 years to get ready. And we're like coming up on the debt. And we, and again, a long story that I also wrote about, we weren't part of one of their sister agencies. We were kind of like left on our own. And, so we're coming up on, 6 months until we're out of here. And there was, now what?
Yeah.
We just keep doing it. Like, are we part of something else? So we ended up taking the initiative and found a couple of other digital agencies that similarly had no plan. And we said, okay, why don't we put all these together and create a new digital focus group within the holding company? And we ended up doing it, but like, we had to do the work. There was no plan. There was no question. There was, not a lot of, nobody came to us and said, "Hey, what do you want to do next? Here's where we see your career." Like, there's zero of that. Similarly
Bob.
at,
Oh,
yeah, go.
well, I was just going to ask. I mean, why is that? I mean, I'm thinking about this in real time. That learning is kind of tangentially related to one of mine,
Yeah.
but like, yeah, why? Why do you think acquirers in both of your cases, and I can say in all the cases I've observed, somewhere between zero and not really a plan existed? Why?
Well, you're going into my fifth one, which is my overall theme here, but
Oh
I'm just
well,
going to go
sorry.
there. I'm going to go
Go there.
there.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
No one, you had one of the ballpark, one out of the ballpark. No one knows what they're doing. Here's the other
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
There's a theme of so much of this and business and life. No one wants to do real work.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
What does that mean to you?
What is
Well, when you
no
say
one wants to.
totally, like, yeah, what's your reaction?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess what well, my head literally went to a situation I'm dealing with right now related to acquisitions. And the in general, I find that people are looking for like the silver bullet, right? Like what I mean, for instance, why are they buying somebody in the first place? Generally speaking, to get bigger, right? To either become more profitable, have more revenue, whatever. Like they're looking to solve some sort of problem. And inorganic growth seems easier than organic growth. Like we all know how hard it is to do our current thing and to do more of our current thing. That's hard. Oh, well, if I just write a check and I slap this company on top of it, well, you mean I can just grow 20% overnight? Great. I'll just do that. That's about as far as people think. And they're not interested or underestimate like all the things that are required on the you don't just like throw it on top and it just magically works itself out. And they don't they underestimate the level of effort and aren't interested in the effort. That's why they're in the M&A business in the first place. That's why they made the purchase. They're not
Yeah,
looking for a bunch of hard execution.
yeah. I think part of it, there might be a little bit of sense to it, which is if it's an earnout. So like our agency with 90% of the value being on revenue and profit, they could sit there and go, if it goes to zero, which it
Then
probably
your downside is
won't.
protected.
Yeah, we made
Yeah,
money
well,
on the
yeah.
deal. I don't know if the second one was similar. Now, our business went from 8 million, our social influencer product went from 8 million when they bought us to 60 million, 2.5 years
Yeah.
later. So now they don't know if they made profit on that, but there's another long
Oh, I do.
story here. But obviously we both businesses did really well. So you can't,
Yeah.
oh, it's doing great. But,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I think, you're kind of hinting at one of the pieces, which is, doing stuff is hard. Like
It's
coming up,
hard.
like this is why they do M&A, because it's impossible to do things internally. Like,
Yeah.
because it's impossible. It's so hard to create anything new. Like
Yep.
getting funding, the big companies are basically doing whatever that when it was a startup, it's doing and executing whatever the founder came up with years ago, whether it's
Yeah.
Delta Airlines or, Fifth Third Bank or, whatever. Like somebody
Starbucks.
opened the
Yeah.
thing, did all the hard, the challenging work of getting this thing off the ground, and then it was a success. And then it's just flying the plane, keeping it in the air, which is a hell of a lot easier than figuring out how to put the parts together and build the plane. And so, there's
Yeah.
cash lying around. Ooh, it's kind of fun to buy companies. Uh, we can add a logo.
Seems
We
like
got,
it'd be easier.
yeah, we got a press release. So, oh, we've got to integrate this thing. Like that's not, it's real work, as they say. By the way, in the investment bank. A side note: one of the things I learned, little thing I learned, is our investment bankers would say, they were talking to other companies that might put an offer in. There was a phrase they use, which is, well, they're doing real work on this
Ah.
deal, so I expect we're going to get a bid.
Hmm.
In other words, like they're crunching numbers, they're asking for stuff, they're going
Yeah.
back and forth, like their team is active. And, once they're active, they'd rather not do work. so
Yeah.
like but once they're active, this is the other part of it, they're probably going to do something, which is
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
cool too. Like, and so again, in life, if like people are spinning up and doing stuff, then something's probably going to happen, in your
Yeah.
deal. And they're coming back, and I think we use this sometimes in our current business fleet, where we're looking to back and founders of new service businesses. In the conversations we have, sometimes we go like, all right, well, why don't you potential CEO go do some work?
Yeah.
And if they come back and do work, we're like, all right, I think they're really into this. And if they don't, we're like, I don't think they're really into it. This is going to be a waste of time. They're not going to want to move forward. But
Well, and the more people do work, the more inertia and momentum start to take over, and now they start to get emotionally committed and really want to go through with a thing. Like that's another thing I didn't fully appreciate. Like you certainly valuations can really plummet, and there's all sorts of things that can happen negatively during the course of like the diligence period. But by and large, they're not looking for reasons not to do it. They
yeah,
want to do the deal. Like they very much want this thing to happen. And every day that passes, they want it more.
but I think it's also like the doing the work is, everybody that at the company has a day job. They've got other responsibilities. They're putting in 40, 50, 60 hours a week, worrying about we're the number's not going to come in here. Something's
Sure.
going to get delayed. Like, and so throwing on, and again, this is not like they're jerks or idiots. I think if there's some problem, it's that no one is in one of these boardrooms, or frankly, the CEO, because that's ultimately where everything falls up, like in the
Yep.
responsibility. Why are we X% of all acquisitions fail, 50, 60, 70, whatever, pick your data point. Um, this is one of the biggest reasons. And so why
Yeah.
not get ahead of it and say, we're going to have a team on this. We're going to make a responsibility. There's a project, there's a clock ticking. But I think it kind of gets to me. The bigger thing it's disappointing is like the lack of, like, not really learning, the CEO that didn't know we had tech. Like,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, what
Yeah.
do you guys do? How do you do it? Why is your margin so much higher than ours? Why are your people seem so much happier than ours? And your retention is high, like, or why aren't you as good on this or this? Like, the curiosity and the interest, and how do we retain and how do we integrate? And, oh, we just pay all this money. How do we make sure that people don't leave? Like, all
Gotta
that
be,
takes someone who cares, you know?
yeah. It's gotta also be just like laziness and ego. I mean, I'm sure there's like such a big part of it that's ego,
We'll
which
say
is
more
like,
the ego. What's the ego
well,
piece?
yeah, I think the ego piece is, look, we are a large publicly traded organization in this case, or we're a large business. You're a small business. We've figured this out. What could we possibly learn from you? And I think it's easy to assume like, oh, you've had success doing this or this. Well, that's because you're a 20-person organization. That would never work at a 2,000-person organization. There's nothing I can learn from you, only what you can learn from me. And also, like, I bought you, you're coming into our machinery. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, that's what I mean by ego. I don't think there's even a genuine interest or belief in the ability to learn from the small businesses that you would acquire.
Hmm.
And again, I don't even think that's the like. Also, go back to what's the thesis? Why is this even happening? This I'll use as a segue to one of mine.
Go.
But why is this even happening? Which is again, you're not like we didn't get acquired because the owners or because that organization met you and I and were really impressed and wanted to learn from us, right? Or they felt like there was a sort of an operational um, opportunity for them. They were trying to buy revenue, right? Like that's it.
Yeah.
They were trying to buy revenue. So, wasn't even the curiosity just wasn't even a consideration. Like I'm looking to sort of bolt on revenue, and that's what I'm going to do, and everything else is just incidental.
Hmm.
I don't know if this is actually, as I finish that up, it's a hard segue, but my
That's
fourth
okay.
hard left turn, um, acquisitions. Despite the fact that what buyers are really looking for is to write a check and hit an easy button, acquisitions are very hard and usually not a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like this, I mean, and by the way, this isn't even like a self-serving point of view to have because I run an M&A practice and I make money when people buy and sell. And I think as a seller, there's plenty of reasons why it makes a lot of good sense. But for all the reasons that you just mentioned, like again, most people who are buying another organization are looking for an easier way to grow. And it's just not that. So it's a bad idea if you're entering it with the wrong premise. Acquisitions are just as hard, if not harder, than the alternative. Like, let's take a smaller example. I'm an agency. I want to buy another agency. That agency is $1.5 million, $2 million, right? And so I think that I can just bolt on a $400,000, $500,000 per year net cash flow business by writing a check for $1.5 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not that simple, right? It's not that simple. It's just as hard, if not harder, than the alternative, which is taking $1.5 million or $2 million and going investing it in my own organic growth, right? Like there must be that like there are no silver bullets. They're just as hard as one another. They're just different ways to grow. And so if you don't think like if it sounds difficult to you to spend the $1.5 million to grow organically, it's going to be just as hard to grow inorganically. And so the reason for doing it has to be different. It has to be, again, clearly synergistic. Like, I have a group of customers and they have a need over here, and I can just, there's some element of like I can bolt on your offering to my thing to my existing customers. There has to be some idea of synergy, some degree of synergy. Otherwise, shit's really hard. And
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, now I've gone through, look, just to be clear, there's just no world where the Ahology acquisition was ROI positive for the buyer. It's not possible. I know that because as a publicly traded company, they generated a very thin margin on about $400 million of revenue. Our business on a gross margin basis was less profitable than some of the other work that they did. And so, again, this is less of an indictment on our operations and more on that business. But either way, I know they didn't generate net north of 50 million in incremental profit, certainly not in a way that would generate a positive ROI. And if I think back to the last 3 or 4 deals that I've been involved in, I don't think those were net. I mean, maybe break even, but certainly not ROI positive. I can think of one. This is a client who acquired a company that, I think another thing that people really underestimate is, again, why am I buying this? What do I think that I'm getting out of this, right? And credit to Quotient, at least there was a compelling reason to buy us. And from a top line revenue perspective, it paid off immediately. It did not generate any profit. And so as a deal, probably was not ROI positive, but at least there was a thesis. But in general, like I see smaller businesses acquire even smaller businesses, and there's no clear thesis.
Hmm.
For instance, like, okay, I'm buying, let's say, an agency, and that agency has a bunch of episodic revenue. Like they just do a bunch of website projects, right? So all their revenue last year, good job that they had a nice year last year. All those customers received their websites and they left, and they're not coming back. And so 100% of their forward-looking performance is going to be generated by you. So you're paying for the privilege of continuing to grow their business. You have to understand like what even is the point of buying this. They are, and when you have one, you have to just realize they're very hard and they're often not great ideas. Um,
There's two things that
yeah,
you
go ahead.
trigger for me that are kind of things you hear but make more sense when you think through that. I think your point. One is, um, there's a lot of founders out there. I thought things like this, like, oh, we, um, sometimes when you're struggling, you're like, oh, maybe someone will just buy us. Maybe even an acqui-hire, we'll take that.
Yeah,
Whatever. Like in the dark
yeah, totally.
days,
We went there.
I know some founders that are like, oh, well, we got something. Of course, someone's going to buy it. I a friend who's works in an industry where there's like two or three mega billion-dollar players, and he's like, so and so is gonna, Workday is gonna buy us. It's like you're so small and not profitable yet. Like that deal, one of the old things is the small deals take just as much money and time to make happen as the big deals.
Totally.
And that's why, like WPP, for example, buying agencies, or even Quotient, as we were having talks with Sunny, their corp dev lead, who is awesome. Um, they're like, let's talk once you're getting close to 10 million in revenue. And that's because then it's, again, it's not a special number, but it's like, okay, that's like a good, feels like a real number that, like, that means you've done something that probably is repeatable. You have a real
Yeah.
business, and then it
Juice is
has
worth the
some kind of
squeeze.
meaningful impact.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing I think about is, uh, our mutual friend who was a kind of a biz dev consultant for us, Eric Del Basso. If you're out there, love you, man. He's famous sayings like this. One of his is like, easy to buy, easy to sell. He used it in terms of like sales and
Products.
revenue
Yep.
production. Yeah. But it reminds me of, you and I over the summer looked at doing an acquisition of our own, a service business that we looked at that, had potential for us to buy for our holding company. And it was a great business, but it was so driven by the founder and her biz dev efforts. They're like, and she wanted to, this was for her as an opportunity to get out of the business. And
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, there's not really a scalable, repeatable biz
No,
dev
they're
process
there.
aside from her.
Yeah.
And she's not going to want to sign up for another 2 or 3 years of working even harder on biz dev and helping create a process from scratch. So for us, it
Right.
was like, yeah, this is going to be too much work for
We
us
know. Yeah.
that we don't want to do. And, work plus risk equals, deal not get done.
Yep.
But it sounds like what you're saying is more buyers need to just go, you know,
Well, yeah,
we
there's
don't
just a
have to
combination.
buy,
You
similar
don't
to what
have to
we
buy.
said is
There's
we
a
don't have to sell.
combination of,
Like we don't have to buy.
yeah, I just see a combination of underestimating how difficult it is to uh, integrate a business, right? This belief that writing a check is going to equate to adding on their historic performance plus a little growth to my performance, and it is simply not that easy. Um, and just I think combined with whether it's the ego or the excitement, exuberance over the idea of like, oh, I could be the kind of business that acquires another business. You just see people get into these situations where they believe and finance it with SBA debt. They
Mm-hmm.
believe that there's somewhat limited downside to this, career defining moment. And like I said, the last three deals I've seen are just totally upside down. One specifically, the target that my client acquired lost their largest client within the first 3 months, and so that deal completely upside down. Doesn't underwrite even a little bit without that client. Um, I can tell you another deal took, this was a much more mature organization, north of $1 million in EBITDA, pretty decent amount up front, also a healthy earnout. Um, we are 2 years, no, we're 1 year, a little more than 1 year into the earnout, and the earnout is on a cumulative profit basis, and we're still in the negative cumulative profit.
Ugh.
Let me just as a spoiler, the earnout assumed that they would make profit and so far have failed to do so. And that's just the rule more than the exception. again, in my seat, mostly my advice is like, don't do it. The only reason to do it is if you can create terms where, like the WPP acquisition of your agency, great. 10% of the deal value was guaranteed. The other 90% you went and earned. And by doing so, you delivered to them a business that was worth them owning.
Mm-hmm.
You can generate terms like that where your downside is meaningfully capped. You're out of pocket an immaterial amount of money you have no problem losing. And the consideration is a function of their ability to continue to do under your umbrella what they were able to do without you or better. And great. That's great. By all means, do that 7 days a week. But the kinds of folks I see that want to go put 7 figures down on like an SBA loan because they think this is an easier way for them to grow, absolutely high as shit. That's not how it works. Don't do it.
And that's the same thing. Real quick, and then I want to get to your final one here. But
Yeah,
I assume you're seeing the same thing. We hear a lot about all these. If I hear another one of these, all the boomers are retiring and looking to sell
oh,
their
for Christ's sake.
businesses. And a lot of people saying, "Well, I'd really love to own a business that just flows cash, and like I don't have to touch it, and it just goes." Like
Yep.
same thing there too, right? Nothing's easy.
Entrepreneurship by acquisition. Yeah, man, nothing's easy. In fact, what I see is, again, in our space, like I've had a few clients that have wanted to buy, other smaller agencies, and those things ultimately get gobbled up by jackasses who want to buy themselves a retirement, and overpay, embarrassingly for deals that just aren't any good. And so, yeah, man, and I mean, I could go on a I could go on a soapbox all day. But the last thing I'll say is, not only, I mean, forget about doing a deal is easy. Finding a business worth buying at a price worth paying is not easy. If you stumbled on one on a website, I have news for you. It's not what you think. People who buy businesses successfully may spend a whole year, prospecting, interviewing, diligencing until they find the business worth buying at the terms worth buying them. Nothing is easy. Nothing is easy. Acquisition can be a fine growth strategy if that is the direction you want to go, but it is not easier than any other growth lever. It's just different.
So the other thing that I want to hit on that I have, Ryan, you tell me if I'm wrong. That's another thing I love about our relationship is
Yeah.
you tell me when I'm full of shit because I say a lot of stuff. But no one, in this whole the boomers are retiring. Guess what? A lot of them are not going to sell their businesses because it's not. They don't care. So, like this example we looked through over the summer, she has banked millions of dollars. She's fine. Like
Yeah.
that extra, the AC, the guy with, 4 AC repair trucks who's 65, 70 years old, he like the work it takes to make this ready for some conglomerate, they don't want to do for an extra $2 million after an
It's
earnout.
just not fucking
Like
worth it.
it's just going to go away. And by the way,
Yeah.
someone else will
It's
take
fine.
it. The young
Yeah.
guy or young gal who starts their own AC repair business starts with an app. Ooh, this is easy. They collect clients, word of mouth. Like that's how it happens. It's not like a business is just this thing that is ever going. Businesses
Yeah.
start and die all the time. Restaurants, are cool for a while and they go away. And like, it's not like you've just got some amazing asset that it's just going to be picked off the ground. Like there's going to be, and who wants to buy it? Go build your own. It's not, especially service businesses that we're a lot of what we're talking about here is like, you can go spin it up right now. All you need is one client.
Yeah. This idea, this fallacy of like all these boomer based businesses are going to come create this like excess surplus of quality businesses to buy. First of all, most of those businesses are not worth buying. Like most businesses in general are not worth buying, and so we just have more businesses that are not worth buying. Like you said, I mean, I give you an example. Again, the reality of how deals get done often differs from like what you read or you think might happen. I have a business, a client who sold their organization for effectively no money up front, like a couple hundred thousand. I mean, this is a $5-6 million gross revenue business. Took
Okay.
very few dollars up front, couple $100,000 maybe, covers transaction costs. That's effectively it. And then ultimately, is selling through an earnout, right? And that earnout will provide a healthy multiple against the profit that's generated over the subsequent years.
Hmm.
Um, but let's say that's, that earnout lasts 3 years and their multiple is like 4 times, which, by the way, at their size, a 4 times multiple is pretty decent. But when you think about it, like, that's only slightly better than if they just ran the business for 3 years. You know what I
I
mean? Like,
know.
they were just getting 1 times every year, and now they're getting 4 times after 3 years. Like, it's only a little bit better, And so again, that's kind of the reality for a lot of businesses. There's plenty. Again, if you eclipse 1 million, 2 million in profit, now you're in a zone where financial buyers can come and put real offers in front of you. But that is such rarefied air that if you're not that, then it's just not that sellable, and the deal's just not going to be that attractive. So again, in that situation, it would have been just as easy to have some deputy in the organization sort of take it over and issue kind of deferred comp to that owner over the course of their retirement. And it would have been easier for everybody, possibly, right? There's all sorts of reasons why people do certain things. But anyway, that looks more like what you might be able to buy if you're in the market for some small business, or you have a small business and you're looking to sell. Nothing's easy, right? Most businesses are not that viable.
But you can't. And I think another thing you just say there that to hit on is, you founders out there, you entrepreneurs out there, especially that haven't raised money. If you're looking to sell to escape, maybe it's just, how do you run the business better? And
Totally.
there's a lot of people, again, having had some conversations, a lot of content out there elevating other people. I've had some friends that have been frustrated as they finally get a really good number two. And it doesn't mean they just hand everything over overnight, but like, they
Totally.
realize that you got to scale this thing up. How do you develop talent, give people more, challenge them, throw them things that they didn't expect, see what they can do. And then you suddenly got the business of your dreams, which is it. You don't have to be that engaged,
And
and it's
you
growing and it's running and everybody's happy.
Yeah. And now the pressure, I mean, we often say at our firm, like, we're going to help you. So you want to sell your business first. We're going to help you build a sellable business,
There you go.
one that is worth buying. And when you have one of those, you're not going to want to sell it, or the urgency to sell it is far less. So all those things that you don't like about your organization are the reasons that nobody would buy it.
All right, well, bring us home. What, you got one
All right.
more in the
Yeah, yeah.
tank here?
All right. Well, so my number 5, and I won't go into a lot of detail because I think maybe we'll touch on this more in a subsequent topic. But
Ooh,
well, I don't know.
I'm out of topics, by the way. So
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well,
throw everything you got out here.
I guess my
We go
point
straight
is
to the end.
the biggest surprise that I had, and this doesn't sound like it would be a surprise, but it felt like a surprise to me, which is you work for someone else now. And like,
Wah, wah.
obviously, I knew
We
that
will
I
have
was
to do
going to
another episode about this.
obviously I knew that I was going to be working for somebody else, right? But I don't think I realized what that meant. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there. It's just that, like, even in a world where you have an earnout and in the deals, you sort of like negotiate some degree of autonomy to run the organization with some degree of independence so that you can hit your earnout targets. Even with all of that, right? Just almost day one, things change, right? Like, you have roles in the new organization, you ladder up to somebody else. Some of your key people get picked off and placed in other areas of the organization. It's just different. Now, again, in our case, at least in my case, it was a bad different. It doesn't always have to be a bad different. There's plenty of success stories where people work for somebody else now and it's the job of their dreams and they have a lot less stress and whatever else. But either way, it's different. Changed overnight.
Can you think of the time where you were mostly like, oh shit? Like, what was the,
Well,
when did that come flying in your face, I guess, the most?
well, I guess there's a couple times. One is just, you obviously know we had a very tight knit, familial kind of a culture, right? Like, we had a cool
Yeah.
office. Everybody, in a time where a lot of people were working remotely, we all were coming to the office. We were having a great time. And you and I sat in the corner or whatever. But I do remember kind of looking around and and again, I'm in finance, but I touched all elements of the business. And gosh, I don't know. There's probably 3 months in, I'm looking up, just daydreaming from what I'm doing, and I realize like I don't even necessarily recognize all the faces that are walking around here. Like the
Hmm.
things I do, they don't even touch any of these people. Like I'm just not. I'm here physically, but I'm not here anymore. And wow, when the hell did that happen? And then I realized I was someplace else, and I think um, I think I realized that I worked somewhere else, and I won't go into like the whole story, but you remember, of course, we at the new organization we had these MBRs, right? It was this new
Monthly
idea
business
where
review.
yeah, MBRs, monthly
Hmm.
business reviews. The organization was going to try, to be honest with you, inspired a little bit. Credit to shout out Quotient, inspired a little bit by some of the things that we had done that worked positively, right? They were going to
Mm-hmm.
try to. Um, find success by shrinking the organization a bit, like creating these business units
Hmm.
that would operate to some degree independently and be sort of managed by general managers. The general managers would have some autonomy to make some flexible choices, and that would, theoretically make each individual business unit a little more nimble, a little more successful, and theoretically all that would ladder up to some better overall success, which I co-sign that sort of mentality. And I got, um, voluntold to sort of run the business unit exercise.
Yeah.
And I think, so I took this very seriously. Like, okay, how would I create an individual business unit, and how would I communicate expectations to the general managers? How would I hold them accountable? What levers would I give them to autonomously run their organization? And so then I, have all this prepared and try to present. And I realized like immediately that, oh, wait, this is a big organization. All this shit, it's just window dressing. Nobody's interested in doing the hard things that would actually give each of those people true autonomy to run an independent organization.
Hmm.
All we're really looking to do is create the facade of autonomy so that
Mm.
theoretically that would, maybe add a little extra motivation incentive, and maybe manufacture a couple extra end of quarter deals. I don't know, but it just, and I don't even mean this like as a negative outright, even though it is negative. It's
Sure.
just, I like large organizations have a perception of like what a small entrepreneurial organization is and how it operates. And their perception is very different than like
Yeah.
what it actually looks
No.
like it means to run a small business and to be, ass on the line for your specific results. And they weren't willing, and just they generally aren't willing to operate that way. Just
Hmm.
and so anyway, realized in that moment like, oh yeah, this is totally different. It's totally different. Again, could be good for some, but for me, you know,
Yeah.
wasn't really where I was going to retire.
No. I mean, I actually, for the first couple of weeks,
Oh,
I
you had optimism. I mean, to be honest with
I
you,
had
Bob, you had
optimism.
optimism for
Yeah,
more than
mostly I
6
didn't
months,
want to do a
maybe.
startup again. Like it's
Of course,
so fucking
so
hard
fucking
to go
hard.
from 0 to 1. And like we
Yeah.
worked forever to get there. And I just want to, I tell people this sometimes and they're like, "What? You're like the startup guy." Like and you say I think I just stole that line from you because we both feel like it's so hard to get
So
something
fucking
off
hard.
the ground.
No way.
And we're at our best when we're running larger things. Like I think that's where when we can I think have both done our magic. It's like with bigger organizations, and so kind of going into the okay, we're part of a big organization. Obviously, we have a successful business here. We know a lot about the industry. Um, hey,
Yeah.
maybe stay here. Like this is a big company. It's public. It's interesting. Maybe we stay here and 5-10 years I'm running this thing and having putting the things I've learned into practice at a larger scale. But a couple weeks in, you're just like, I feel like I'm on a different planet. Like,
Yeah,
you're
totally.
seeing in color and they're in black and white. And how do you describe that? And I think those are the learnings that come from being an entrepreneur. It's just a different wiring that you have to get. You said your butt's on the line. Like, your butt's on the line. Like, another thing, and I think about this a lot still,
Yeah.
hung up on it, call it whatever you want. But something that just dropped into the penny drop was like, you can't, as an entrepreneur, with rare exceptions, if you raise money, you can't get fired. So
Yeah, sure.
success is nothing but the business. Like that's
Exactly.
all it is. Like, and you get to make decisions like, we're going to do this, we're going to go here, and it's not dictatorial, but it's a team, but like, that's what we're doing. If you're in a corporate world and you're not the CEO, even if you are the CEO, like it's just hit the next
Totally.
number.
Yeah.
There's no like you're worried about getting fired, and so that just changes people's entire mindset to the fact that both at WPP and both of my acquisitions, the day after the earnout was done, I now reported to somebody. Anyway,
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
detail here, but
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
boss in both cases was a former entrepreneur too that the company had
Yeah.
bought.
Yeah.
And both of those guys changed. They were
Yeah.
corporate now. Like they lost that entrepreneurial brain and they were like, maybe I'll be the CEO of this company someday. Or just wanted to rest for a while and get a couple of, big checks.
Yep.
And both of them ended up leaving and doing something entrepreneurial again. And they went back and were successful in that model. So even the entrepreneurial spirit, like people can shift quickly into, that kind of corporate mindset, which just is it is. And I just, I realize I just can't do it. And I
I
think,
mean, God
both of
bless
us,
people who can. To be honest, I have a
someone's
lot
got
of
to,
envy. I
right.
wish I could. It is just multiples times easier running a business where your job is not to get fired or to get promoted. Like to play that game is a lot easier on paper than it is to go convince a bunch of customers to pay you for this thing you have to service or build. But that's just never really been in my DNA. The other thing I'll just say, like back to the again, like we're painting and what we can do an episode on just like what is the life post earnout or during the earnout, I should say. We didn't have much of a life post earnout, maybe 2 days long.
Yeah.
But
Maybe the
um,
mistake there, but
yeah, exactly, 2 days too long. But both of us were somewhat, well, you to a greater degree than me, somewhat optimistic about, hey, look, because again, we're the entrepreneur folks. This is the new challenge. Okay, great. Here's the new hill to climb. Let's come in here and have a positive mark on this organization. And we didn't find success doing that. Um, and there was really no receptivity or interest to having either of us come in the capacity that we wanted.
mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's necessarily true for everybody's sort of M&A journey,
Mm-hmm.
but it was true for ours. And again, it goes back to why did they buy us? And they didn't buy us for you and me. We weren't part of it. Like we were not part of the consideration set. It was, they have this product that generates this amount of revenue. I can put that product into the hands of these 100 sellers and I can turn $8 million into $60 million. And that's exactly what they did. And Ryan and Bob are not part of it. And that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that we couldn't have contributed. It just means that they weren't interested in finding out. So again, like for a person that's potentially looking to sell their organization, you got to figure out, what do you want out of the sale? What do they want out of your sale? And as
Mm-hmm.
long as those two things are aligned, and quite frankly, I think in our case they were aligned. Both of us were financially motivated, and it's impossible to argue that the financial outcome of this deal was great. Too good. Doesn't make any sense, like on a multiple basis. It worked out great. All the other stuff, that wasn't part of it. It's not what we were looking for, and we were fools to go searching. Like just so anyway,
Yeah. That's
I
a
think
great,
it's a realization I've had reflecting on it. Just, it wasn't even an indictment on either one of us. Nobody's mind was even open to that. Nobody was looking for either of us to be very useful to their organization. It's fine.
no. And I'll admit I'm a giant pain in the ass too. Like
Oh yeah, no, I mean, if
I'm working at
they
Procter
started
and Gamble,
neutral
I
to
was a pain
you,
in the ass.
yeah, they were neutral, and then they were very anti immediately. Like, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah.
I'm just kidding, but
No,
yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
but I think again, that's part of like, you got to find, like, I think another thing just that, I was thinking this morning, I don't know, maybe anticipating this, lessons learned and stuff, but, this is going on a side tangent here in the last
No, go ahead.
couple minutes, but, I got a friend who's struggling to get a job and kind of, he was a CMO, he's been struggling to get his next CMO job. And I was talking to him, caught up, for about the first time in a year recently. And I was telling him, like, you know what? You see how the matrix works. Like he's smart and he understands how people work and why they do things. And my comment to him was, I think that's limiting your ability to get another corporate job,
Yeah.
because either like you're not playing the game, or they
Yeah.
see and fear you because you know the levels of the game that they don't.
Yeah.
And so, you know, at one end, like people fear people. Like, you know, you're
Yeah.
coming in, you've just got a giant check. You're fearless in the meeting. You know, you're kind of a pain in the ass. You call out the bullshit. Like that's
Yeah.
scary, man. Like that, you know, that's is this guy going to take my job? Is this guy going to screw things up? Who is
Yeah.
he? You know, all
Yeah.
the
Totally.
ego. I mean, again, the overall theme is, remember, ego, fear, humans,
Of course.
boredom, laziness, sloth, whatever you want to call it.
These are
Like
the motivating
this
behaviors.
is
Yeah.
this is not business school. This is just like textbook. This is human beings figuring shit out, you know.
Yeah.
And even this whole podcast is like, but the fun thing is we went and did it, and we got to learn and be
Yeah.
surprised. Like that's the beauty of the, you know, this whole journey.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I guess, if, and that is, I think like that's the summary of, again, maybe just human beings in business in general, but also in human beings in an M&A context. If you go in with that perspective and realization, then at minimum, you can have fewer sleepless nights, right? And just kind of like treat it for what it is and learn what it is. And at maximum, you can use some degree of that to your own benefit, maybe get a slightly better outcome.
That's
But
perfect. Yeah.
well, Bob, I don't know. I think we have it surrounded. I think
Let's wrap it up.
here's a
Yeah.
question for you.
You got
Last
one
one.
more?
This is okay. So based on those 5 surprises, would you do it again? Like you and I, we have a let's just say we have a business, does 10 million in revenue, 2 million in profit. Would you go through those 18 months again?
I'm personally not doing that again. I don't want to do it again. I've been there, done that. I mean, you know, no. I mean, I'd rather not sell businesses going forward. I'd rather go back to what you were saying, is like, let's build great businesses and hold on to them forever and
Yep.
not have to deal with that. You know, and that's kind of the model we're doing. Like at the same time, if one of our businesses, and it, you know, if it makes a lot of sense and the CEO of the businesses that we're backing wants to do it, then, you know, that could be their part of their
Yeah.
hero's journey to go for it. But for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
no thanks. How about you?
I'm with you. It's one of those. I described my experience going through the brandery like a startup accelerator. Similarly, it's an experience that I'm so thankful that I had. Like I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to experience it and learn what it's about and take these lessons. And I'm just thankful for the opportunity to be on this podcast. But never again. Like I just don't ever want to repeat that again. It just wasn't both the earnout and the diligence, especially, but even the earnout, like it took a couple of years off my life, right? Like yes, you get a big check, but you fucking earn it too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you pull forward future earnings, but you pull forward future stress. Everything kind of evens out.
All right. Well, I have a feeling this is not the last topic or last time we're going to talk about this topic on this
I
podcast,
suspect not.
but you got to tell us if you enjoyed this. So subscribe, give little likes on wherever, on Substack when I do the summary. Shoot us texts if you know us personally, or if you don't, hit us on LinkedIn. I'll put all the links to, especially Ryan. Remember, he's got a business that can help you think about this and make it happen.
That's right.
And as you could tell from here, I think he's going to be getting you the right opinion, even if it's don't buy or don't sell. Not afraid of that, to do what's right for you. And again, we're here. We're talking together, both to have fun together, but to pay it forward and help everybody out there who is or may in the future go through this and make it a little bit better, work around some of the problems out there. So we'll let you go over here. Thanks so much, Ryan, for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man.
We'll
It's
see
a lot of
you
fun.
next time, and ahoy for now.